dozen employers, part of our observance of Workers' Memorial Week. National COSH, if you're not familiar with us, is a national network of 26 local worker health and safety coalitions. We are also the convener of the Protecting Workers Alliance, a network of thousands of workers and advocates. Together, we build knowledge and support the leadership of workers to advocate for safety and a voice on the job. So Workers' Memorial Week is observed across the United States and around the globe. This year, we're celebrating it between April 23rd and May 1st. We remember workers who have lost their lives or become sick or injured from preventable workplace hazards. This is a time to raise our voices and actions to eliminate these hazards so every worker can go home safely at the end of his or her shift every single day. So we begin our program with a few brief words about 3 workers who lost their lives during the past year. Then I'll tell you about this year's Dirty Dozen. So finally, we'll hear from our panelists, dynamic worker leaders who are standing up for safety on the job. After we hear from our panelists, we'll take questions from journalists who are with us for today's event. We also have more than 100 members of our network from COSH groups, worker centers, unions, and partners joining us today for this important and interactive event. So if you can all stay on mute when not speaking, that would be great. It will improve our audio quality. And journalists on the call, when we get to the Q&A after the panelists, you can unmute yourself to ask your questions or pose your questions through the chat. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Melissa Moriarty, our communications manager at National COSH, to start today's observance of Workers' Memorial Week. So, Melissa.
Thank you, Jessica. While there are thousands of workers who have died last year, we'd like to highlight 3 workers who were killed at work and taken too soon. The first worker is Jordan Romero. He worked at Atlantic Coast Utilities. He was a newlywed who leaves behind a wife and 2 children. He was 27 years old at the time of his death from a preventable event at a Boston construction site. Jordan was close to his sister, Leslie, who was quoted as saying, he just wanted to work really hard for his kids. Jordan's employer, Atlantic Coast Utilities, lied about past safety violations to receive a Boston construction permit. The next worker is Robert Woods, a Dollar General worker from St. Louis, who was murdered during a store robbery in 2018. Robert was just 42 years old when he was killed at work. Despite many instances of violent crimes at its stores, Dollar General has failed to take adequate security measures. His widow, Jolanda Woods, is quoted as saying, "These stores are throughout our community, but they have no interest in the community. They don't give anything back." The third worker is Janine Denise Johnson Williams. She was one of the 9 workers who died when a tornado struck through the Mayfield Consumer Products plant, where she worked in Mayfield, Kentucky. She was a member of Christ Temple Apostolic Church and is survived by her husband, Ivy Williams, 3 daughters and a son, and 17 grandchildren. 17 grandchildren who will not have the loving support of their grandmother as they grow up. 5 workers at the plant where Johnson Williams died told NBC News that when they asked to leave the candle factory because they heard reports of severe weather alerts, they were told that they needed to stay on the job or risk being fired. To access more stories like these, you can visit our database called Killed at Work, U.S. Worker Memorial. You can find it at nationalcosh.org with an interactive map to learn more about the people behind these preventable deaths.
Thank you, Melissa, for sharing the real life stories of these workers whose lives were stolen. We're going to ask folks for a brief moment of silence to pay tribute to these workers. So as we think about the tens of thousands of workers whose lives were stripped away from them by unsafe workplaces, let's take a moment to think about workplaces where workers' health and safety was really a true priority instead of a token slogan or poster on the wall. This is why we do the Dirty Dozen every year. Workers who die on the job have names. We say their names out loud. We talk about how they died, and we confront the reality that their deaths were preventable. Confronting this reality is essential so that workers can gain power to win safety improvements that will prevent further loss of life. So we're going to now announce the Dirty Dozen companies. Here's a list of the Dirty Dozen who made our report this year. First, we have Amazon. This is their third time on the Dirty Dozen list, nothing to be proud of. We also have Atlantic Coast Utilities, Lawrence Maloney. We just heard about Jordan Romero, one of the two workers who died in Boston after his employer lied to get a construction permit. We also have Daikin America. At least 3 workers are dead from toxic exposures at this company. We have Dollar General. Robert Woods, as we just heard, was murdered working at Dollar General. Others stabbed, shot, punched, and pistol whipped. We'll hear from a fired Dollar General worker who started her own movement that's taken off on social media after witnessing and experiencing so much danger at these stores. We also have Ernst Nursery and Farms, where a farm worker died during an Oregon heat wave. The boss tried to blame the worker for his own death. We have Foundation Food Group, Gold Creek Foods, where 6 workers died from nitrogen leak last year, and there have been 2 more chemical leaks since then. We also included Hilton Hotels. This corporate giant is cutting service, creating risk for workers and hotel guests. We have Hilton Hotels is also now our featured campaign on workedup.us, where supporters can sign their online petition. We have Kingspan Light and Air. This company would not respond to concerns about toxic indoor pollution, so workers brought in their own monitors and found evidence of dirty air. There's Lykes Cleaners Wash Supply, working with no ventilation. Laundry workers had no protections from COVID or toxic chemicals. When they organized, the boss closed the shop and fired them all. Today, you'll hear from a former employee about all that she endured at this facility. We also included Mayfield Consumer Products. 9 workers, including Janine Denise Johnson Williams, died when a tornado struck, and workers were told not to go home. Refresco is another company. Workers at risk at this bottling plant are at risk at this bottling plant from COVID-19 and are getting infected. We also have Starbucks. Retail workers have been exposed to COVID-19 and are getting infected now. National Kosh has been featuring Starbucks workers who are organizing to improve their working conditions in our Worked Up campaign. We'll drop that link in the chat soon. We'll also hear today from one of the Memphis 7 workers who were fired by Starbucks because they are standing up for safety and dignity. And I want to clarify for the Refresco company that workers at this bottling plant for COVID-19 had exposure to chemical and fires. So apologies for that confusion there. So I'm sad to tell you that the preventable tragedy of workplace deaths, illnesses, and injuries goes far beyond just the 12 employers. Far too many are dying from preventable workplace trauma and from long-term exposures to toxic chemicals. And even though there is no definitive tracking of COVID deaths from workplace exposure, we know there has been a huge loss of life. You can find details in our Dirty Dozen report and also information about the deep structural inequities based on race, class, and income that have been revealed during the pandemic. Workers of color are suffering disproportionately, including higher death rates due to troubling disparities in access to healthcare. There's fears of retaliation due to immigration status and other resources that can literally mean the difference between life and death. So during Workers' Memorial Week is a time to take action. We need to address these inequities, cope with a continuing pandemic, and address the preventable hazards that are present in our workplace. So we invite you to review the Dirty Dozen report for more information, including infographics about each of these unsafe employers mentioned today. So instead of listening to workers who raise safety issues, employers continue to illegally retaliate against them. We'll hear some of these stories today. The good news is workers are standing up, and not only standing up, they're winning. We know from experience that the surest way to improve working conditions is when workers join together, so they have a voice on the job and have the power to win demands for better health and safety. We're excited to have 3 workers with us today who are dynamic leaders and organizers, and I'm delighted to introduce you to them now so we can hear directly their stories. So first, we're going to hear from Jennifer Bates. She's an Amazon worker from Bessemer, Alabama. They're still counting votes to find out if workers there have won the right to union representation. And here's Jennifer to tell us why workers want a union. Welcome, Jennifer. If you can unmute yourself, Jennifer, so we could hear you, that'd be great. Thank you.
Bienvenida.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me on today. I actually really, it's been a tough 2 years. I've started working at Amazon in May 2020. And upon working there a couple of months, I became an ambassador there. And upon the first week, I noticed the issues with the pain and the injuries of people walking out limping. And when I moved to another department, I began to see a lot of things. Even as an ambassador, I was kind of free working. So I was able to see how the employees were being treated. I've gone to management about the lines being down, boxes falling on their heads, scratching people in their faces, and how the company continues to push us, even when the conveyors are down, to lift the containers and put them on the floor. And no matter how fast we go or the numbers that they have, they continue to push the pace of work to get more out of the employees. I've spoken to that and spoken of the totes that they allow us to pick up and push to the side when the conveyor's down. I've talked to them about just stopping the line because you're causing injuries to the employees. I've had a couple of injuries myself. And one of the things that Amazon does, they try to push the issues and have you to say or tell you that your injury is from your own illness. And at one point, they documented one of my injuries, and once I looked online, I saw that they put on their own injury, and I had to go to my own doctor. And this time, I injured my arm. I think I pulled a tendon in my arm. I had to have an MRI where I have inflammation, and it's pulling boxes off the line.
Jennifer, sorry to apologize. If I can just ask you to pause for a brief second. I think we're set. Wonderful. Thank you, Jesse. Jennifer, if you can continue, apologies again.
Okay. Yes. And one of the injuries, I noticed that I looked online, they put under my own illness or own injury. And this time I asked them to send me to the doctor because after 4 or 5 days, they continued to want to give me ibuprofen, ice pack, or heat pad. And she got upset and said, well, it's a lot of work to go to your doctor. We have to treat you here before we send you to a doctor. I said, well, it's been 4 days and my arm is still swollen and is in pain. So she got upset and said it's going to take a minute. And from talking to most of the people that's back there in the cubicles, they have the same issue where Amazon tells you that it was your own injury and had nothing to do with what's going on there. And they promote this same thing that ice pack, hot pack, heating pack, and ibuprofen is supposed to treat everything that happens there. So it's their safety is probably maybe zero in the facility to me, because it's not number one. Out of all the places that I ever worked at, I've never seen the pace of work pushed and safety not being number one on the chart. We've had several deaths in the facility that Amazon not one time even mentioned the deaths of those employees. I actually walked upstairs to go do another job, and I saw one of the guys laying on the floor in front of the restroom. And one of management told me to go back downstairs. I said, well, the manager sent me up here to go to work. And I could clearly see that the man was dead because his arm was flopped over the bed and they were trying to resuscitate him. And by the time I made it, he told me to go another direction. So by the time I made it to the other direction, they was pulling him off of the elevator. And not one time did Amazon acknowledge the deaths of our coworkers or send a mass text message out to us to have a moment of silence for those, or even send a message out and say, we lost a soldier on the job. To me, I feel like strongly that Amazon promotes profits over people in every day that I've worked there. And we, upon ourselves, got together as employees and did a visual for the employees. Amazon wouldn't release their names and said that it was because of privacy, but we still hosted a visual outside in acknowledgement of the coworkers that we lost. It was 6. One of them, that was about 20 minutes before they even found him in the truck. I've even mentioned to them about why having one person on the truck to unload the truck and hot as it is. But they continue to push back and say, hey, everything is okay. We have a high turnover rate with so many people having injuries and even not getting paid, or the communication is off between ERC, disability, and human resources. So I really believe Amazon makes the dirty dozen list because our safety issues is horrible in this place. And the pace of work calls was contributed to the deaths of the 6 employees there. And even with OSHA, they said that Amazon didn't report all the deaths.
Jennifer, thank you so much for your strength, for your courage to provide your story, your testimony. You said it. These are corporations, multi-billion-dollar corporations that are prioritizing profit over human lives. It's a sad reality for most of our speakers here today. It's incomprehensible to even think about a company or, in this, a corporation that is so rich that workers are on the floor in front of the restrooms requesting and demanding for these safety conditions to be improved. So thank you again, Jennifer, for your courage and for being with us today. Next up, we're going to hear from Nikki Taylor. She's a former Starbucks shift supervisor from Memphis, Tennessee. She's organized with her coworkers, and the company sadly has retaliated against her. Nikki, I'm gonna now open the mic to you and ask you to please share your story.
Sure will. Nikki Taylor here. First of all, thank you guys for having me on this call. This is amazing. So as you heard, we were retaliated against. It was me and 6 other workers. We were terminated just about 3 weeks to the date that we put out the petition to unionize. It has been founded by the NLRB that our termination was unlawful. So there's a small victory for us there. But I'm going to talk a little bit about why me and my comrades felt like we needed this union. So of course, there's the regular things that everybody needs more of, healthcare and pay and things like that. But one of the main things that we felt like we needed a voice in is our safety. From things like wires hanging around our particular Starbucks that just a few weeks ago caught fire that we can never get fixed. There's things like tiles that were broken in the floors. I had a former manager trip over a tile and break her ankle, and these things were never fixed. That tile is still broken to this day. Um, Even when it comes to our customers and coming in and kind of abusing us verbally, been threatened to be stabbed multiple times over a latte, and things of that nature. But we never got security. In fact, funny thing is, we didn't get security, but the moment we were terminated, they felt like the managers were at risk and they got security against us. But the even bigger safety issue that we had was the way that they dealt with COVID. And in the very beginning, I personally felt like Starbucks cared about our health and safety when it came to COVID. I mean, we had plexiglasses up and mask mandates for both the customers and the partners. We went down to one bathroom so we can better monitor how the bathrooms were cleaned. Cafes were shut down and things of that nature. But I felt like as soon as the customers started complaining about our safety protocols, Starbucks started to drop those things. We went back to having 2 bathrooms, and it was harder to manage the cleanliness of the bathrooms. They took away our plexiglasses. They took away the mandate for customers to wear masks. And of course, now they've taken away the mandate for employees to wear masks. And when we were exposed to COVID, such as I was exposed for 2 days. I worked a weekend shift with someone who tested positive that following Monday. And that Wednesday following, I brought COVID home to my 8-year-old, basically. She woke up with a 102 fever, which is something that wouldn't happen had protocols been in place for me to not have to be at work simply because I was vaccinated. I wouldn't have brought that home to my family. And like I said previously, it's really more about what the customer wants and more about how the customer sees. And as soon as a customer complains about how they feel about things that happen in the store, Starbucks drops it because they're so customer focused and they don't really focus on the employees that they call partners at all. It's not about really what we want, it's about what the customer wants. And that definitely puts us in harm's way just on every day level. So that's why Starbucks belongs on the Dirty Dozen, because it's you want to go to work and feel safe. You want to go home to work and feel protected. You want to go to work and feel like I'm not going to bring a sickness home to my 8-year-old. But Starbucks didn't care anything about that. I wasn't even reached out to ask how my child was when I had to stay at home for 5 days because she had it. So Starbucks definitely belongs on this list, along with everything else that they've done in the last few weeks. So again, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you for your courage, your optimism, and still being part of this journey to ensure safer working conditions. Again, your story is a great reflection of how safety does not get contained at the work site. If we're unsafe, this potentially impacts our family. I'm sorry to hear that your child was sick. Hope they're doing better. And thank you again for sharing your story. We're now going to go and hear from Mary Gundel. She's a former Dollar General store manager. Her story about unsafe conditions at work has gone viral on TikTok, and she's here today to share with us. So Mary, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and share a little bit about your story.
Hi, and thank you guys for having me. I was previously employed by Dollar General, but then was soon terminated as soon as I made a TikTok series talking about workplace conditions, the safety hazards, and things like that. They terminated me within 3 days of those videos catching a lot of attention and going viral because a lot of employees across the nation that work for Dollar General, they related to it. One of our main safety concerns is that the stores are funded with so little labor that store managers, as well as any manager, whether you're a key holder or an assistant manager, being left inside the stores by themselves during operating hours for long periods of time, anywhere from 6 o'clock in the morning until 2, 3, and 4 o'clock in the afternoon by themselves, having to check in trucks, run registers, stock freight, and deal with any craziness or anything like that that might happen, all while being by themselves. And just in the year 2020, here in my district, a store manager was actually terminated for not following protocol after there was an armed robbery at his location. He called the police and huddled everyone he could into the office, which is the safest place. And because the man was armed, the police later ended up finding him. He didn't drop his weapon, so he was shot, and the robber was actually killed. The store manager who went through this tragedy was later terminated because he did not follow their put in a ticket policy. We also have another instance that happened here in my district alone, where a key holder was by himself in the store and the AC wasn't working. It was so hot. He ended up passing out and having a seizure, and a customer found him 10 to 15 minutes later. So that was definitely something I feel as though could have been prevented.
Mary, give me a sec. I just want to make sure folks can hear you. I'm going to ask everyone to please mute themselves if you're not speaking. We're getting a little bit of background noise, so just to make sure that we can hear Mary and everyone else speaking today clearly. Thank you. Sorry, Mary, please continue.
It's okay. Thank you. I myself has been a witness to workplace violence. Just in my little over 3 years with the company, I've been threatened on multiple occasions. I've had a knife pulled out on me and threatened to kill me when I got off of work. I've had things thrown at me. I've been pushed. I've been shoved. All of these things while working in these stores, and their response is to put in a ticket to corporate so they know it's an issue, but it was never addressed. I was also almost kidnapped in the parking lot and pulled through my car window after leaving and closing the store for the night. And that is just not okay. There was never any reach out from corporate or human resources to ask me if I was okay or if I needed any therapy services or anything of that nature. And quite honestly, there really never is a reach out from anyone after an incident like this. And quite honestly, with all of the fines that Dollar General has been fined for, just in the last 2 years is over $56 million. And without that amount of money, if they can pay out that much and be okay with it, why couldn't they invest that money into their stores to ensure that their employees are protected? There's a lot of stores, almost every single one you can walk into and look into their coolers. There's mold. There's a lot of safety concerns, not just with employees being by themselves, but as well as ACs not working and them not being fixed, or stores in the winter not having heat for their employees. And their response is to put in a ticket to corporate to let them know of the issue. But plenty of these tickets just go unresponded to. And so that is where our movement, hashtag put in a ticket, was generated from.
Thank you so much, Mary. And thank you, as you said it, you are a leader not only to this group, but creating a movement. I want to point out, I know folks are making commentary on the chat. Thank you all for your comments. To one of the points is that, workplace violence is rampant throughout the country, especially in retail services. There are protections. If you're a worker on this call, dealing with similar issues, as Mary has shared, there are legal standards around workplace violence. However, employers need to be held accountable. The enforcement piece is key. OSHA needs to do its due diligence to ensure that, these employers are creating the programs, the prevention programs to ensure safe workplaces. But it goes a lot beyond the workplace violence piece, Mary, as you share. So thank you again for shedding some light to the reality. And again, you have our support in your continuous growth of your movement. So just to keep things moving, I'm now going to invite Sandra Mejia. She's a former employee at Liax Cleaners Wash Supply Laundromat. She is part of a lawsuit against Liax where she endured inhumane conditions. Sandra está allí. Si podemos ahora recibir su historia y testimonio.
Are you there, Sandra? If we can get your statements and your testimony working for this laundromat, Sandra?
Sandra, si puede hablar un poquito más fuerte.
Sandra, can you speak a little louder so we can hear you, please? Good afternoon. This is Sandra Mejia. I was working in the laundromat, and I was working in Guillot washing line. I started working there in 2018. When I started working, very bad conditions in the place of work. There was no ventilation during the summer. The heat was unbearable. There were times where they would not give us, they were supposed to give us water in that place because sometimes we didn't have that. Or toilet paper. We had to manage clothing with human feces, and we would find cutting sharp objects, syringes, blades. One of my co-workers got poked with one of the syringes, and she mentioned that about the accidents, and they said like, no, nothing is happening. Go back to work. Sometimes I had strong headaches because of the heat, and I would go and I would tell them that I wanted to go home because I wasn't feeling well. And they would tell me that no, because there was a lot of work and that for me to continue working, and they would just give me a Tylenol. There were times when it was cold and there was no heating. When the work orders would come, I would open the door and keep it open for a while, and it was a very intense cold that we had to put anything we would find to put on our feet and not be as cold. The conditions were terrible. There were 2 times that there was fire. The first time, one co-worker, without knowing the consequences, opened the machine and the fire got more intense. So they shut the door closed to close it back, and there was no, the extinguisher that we had there was not working. The second time there was the same thing, but you're more aware the second time that you cannot open a machine, and there was the person in charge didn't even know what to do. I feel like that when you have somebody, you have to make sure that they are trained, that they know all these kinds of things that may happen. And that lady didn't know. They would have us work like that with the smoke. The door, the emergency door was all the time locked, and they would hold our salary. Sometimes they would not pay our week until next week. And we needed to pay to make our own payments, like the power, rent, and also amongst our co-workers and we decided to, and we contact people from OSHA to help us, COSHA to help us to see what we could do, and they started to to help. We met somebody that told us that we could get unionized, and we did. Independent union, we won, but they did not respect the employers. They did not respected that, and they declared bankruptcy and closed the laundromat, and now we're fighting. There is a process still of a sue. We still don't know what's going to be next in that process, but I feel like it's unfair because as migrant women, we're here to work, to help our families. Many lost friends and co-workers. In this case, I lost two people. There was my mother and my mother-in-law, and I couldn't help them. Then we had fought a lot, and I think that as migrant women, we have the right to have benefits as well. They have told us that laundromats are essential, and it's not true because they excluded us. So we are going over ERO law to be heard. Sandra, thank you so much for being so brave and for sharing your story, your testimony. That is the reality of a lot of laundromat workers. We are here and we send you lots of love and support. We're here, not only your movement. I know that the Center of Laundromat Workers is supporting you, and we give you a lot of power and energy to continue with that movement and to bring this reality to all of us that are here participating. I also would like to make people
would allow for workers to build health and safety committees, giving them a space to talk to the employer more directly, make those demands in terms of workplace health and safety. Sandra's testimony really speaks to the lack of any standards from employers of keeping workers in slave conditions. When you're holding back not only wages, treating workers inhumane. I mean, it's terrible what we have heard from Sandra and many of her coworkers. And I just want to also particularly shed light to that this is an industry that employs many immigrant workers in many conditions, Latinx, that don't speak English as a primary language, and again, exploit these workers to the maximum possibility. So I applaud the Laundry Workers Center for your efforts, and we will stay in tune to support you in any way that we can. So again, want to thank all our panelists here today for joining us and for, again, being so courageous and brave and sharing your testimony during this week, and standing up for your coworkers. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Melissa Moriarty, again, who will moderate the question and answers from journalists and the press who are on this call with us today. So Melissa, if you can take it on. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra, and to all the workers who spoke. I just wanted to let journalists know that we also have a Refresco worker on today's call. Her name is Lydia Guavera, and she's able to take any questions if you have some for her. If you're a journalist and would like to ask a question, please raise your hands using the raise hand feature on Zoom and I'll call on you, or you may also write your question in the chat. First hand I see is Chris Isidore. Chris, would you like to
Thanks
meet
very much. If I could just get clarity, are Mary and Nikki back on the job? I know that Nikki said that she had won in order to go back to work. Is she back at work at Starbucks? Or is she still fighting to get her job back? And is Mary out of work now, or she found another job since she's left Dollar General?
Hey, so we actually are still fighting right now. The NIRB has filed the formal complaint probably about 3 or 4 days ago. So we will be taking this to court, but they are fighting for immediate reinstatement and back pay for all of the hours we've missed since February 8th.
And you were a shift supervisor there, Nikki?
Yes, I was.
And Mary, and Nikki and Mary, have you found other jobs? Or are you out of work right now?
I am currently not reinstated with Dollar General. Currently, it's almost like they view me as their enemy, to be honest with you. Just because so many employees are now speaking out about working conditions since my viral videos. I have not found another line of work just yet, but as well, the movement has been taking up a lot of my time, which I'm very happy with. I'm very happy to do, and I'm very happy to help others who want to speak out and want change within the company at this point.
I am also not working right now. I'm doing full-time organizing, so helping other stores on the bargaining committee for several of the stores in New York that have already unionized. But at this moment, I am a stay-at-home mom.
And one last question about Amazon. Has OSHA confirmed the deaths at Amazon? Or, I mean, I know that Edwardsville's Amazon deaths have obviously been confirmed. I'm wondering if an outside authority has confirmed what Amazon's been denying about deaths in Bessemer.
So just to answer that question, OSHA released a hazard alert. Unfortunately, there's not been more information in terms of, a thorough inspection and so forth. So I invite anyone from our team if they have any additional information, but I do think that that's the latest that we have on that.
Thank you, Chris. Let's see here. Next up I see is Beverly Banks. Beverly, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you so much. Hi, I'm Beverly. I'm a reporter with Law 360. And I had a question about union organizing. So maybe Jennifer and Nikki can answer this one. But how do you think union organizing efforts have made an impact, if any, on the company's response to worker safety? What have you seen as a result of that in those conversations?
Well, with workplace safety in Bessemer, one of the things that they did was bring a maintenance guy in on the dock in our area, but it still doesn't work. As far as our conversation, as far as organizing, it's been 2 years and we're still having injuries and safety issues. Amazon is more about attacking the employees, about wearing longer hair or a longer necklace when they give us the long lanyards with our ID badge on it. So instead of being accountable for the things that are wrong in the place that's causing the injuries, they are more focused on attacking the employees for things. So in 2 years, nothing has really changed.
To answer that question, I believe she said Nikki can answer too. To be honest, Starbucks has taken our campaign and done the opposite of reacted in a positive way. The only thing they've done to kind of say they are doing something about safety, if they started cracking down and enforcing policies that they didn't enforce before. But as far as our safety, they haven't been making smart moves in this union campaign at all. So they really haven't done anything.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Chris, I see you have your hand up again.
Yeah, just for the National Kosh, do you have examples of deaths at Starbucks? And if not, then why did Starbucks make the list when there are so many other employers nationwide who have had deaths who aren't on the list?
So Chris, to answer your question, Roger, feel free to add as well. But in terms of the process to getting onto the Dirty Dozen list was based on nominations from our network of worked up partners, worker safety activists. The severity of safety risk to workers was a big component of making the Dirty Dozen list, as well as repeat and serious violation of safety standards and applicable laws. The position of a company within its industry and the economy and its ability to influence broader workplace standards. So that's also a big criteria. And the presence of a campaign by workers and or allies to correct the health and safety problems in Starbucks fit the bill in all this and for this criteria, which is the reason that that they made the list. Now, to your point, yes, there are tons of employers that could make the list if it wasn't limited to just a dozen of them. But again, we have different criteria that also speaks to workers who are actively doing a campaign to try to make these changes.
Chris, this is Roger here from the National Kosh team. I would also say that we try and look at a whole range of examples of unsafe conditions. Fatalities is one measure, but it's not the only measure. A lot of bad stuff can happen before a worker dies. Certainly the risk of COVID-19, which Nikki was talking about, is potentially life-threatening. And we have other examples that involve injuries and illnesses. So it's a range of things that we look at. Trying to measure by fatalities alone is not the approach we use. For one thing, not all fatalities get recorded or are recorded by OSHA. So we're looking at a broad range here, and that's why you see the companies here that we've selected.
Is that one of the reasons you're highlighting the Bessemer Amazon location and not the Edwardsville, which had the same kind of situation you had in Kentucky with the tornado and the workers not allowed to go home?
Yeah, we're really talking about Amazon as a whole. Bessemer is one of the more recent examples. And there's a very dramatic testimony on a video there, the worker who passed away. So, but it's Amazon as a whole has earned this dubious distinction of being on the list 3 times in a row. Their injury rate nationwide is much, much higher than any other warehouse company. So it's those kind of things nationwide, and what happened in Edwardsville and what happened in Alabama. So it's all of those instances that comprise that selection.
Thank you, Chris. Dave Blanchard, I see that you have your hand up. If you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Kind of a follow-up to the previous question. I know you got to get a lot more nominations than you can possibly address in just a dozen companies. I was kind of wondering how you determine what industries. I mean, it seems that just from the examples that we heard from today, retail kind of came under the scrutiny this year, but just in terms of the most dangerous occupations, transportation by far would probably be at the head of that list, as well as there's a lot of other occupations where there's danger and every day you go to work. So I just wonder how you determine which industries you might want to focus on for these reports.
So as I mentioned earlier, Mark, one of the big factors to the dozen itself is the presence of a campaign by workers that are nominated from our list of partners and allies. Yes, the list goes on. There are, very dangerous jobs out there, and we're not minimizing those industries. The report itself highlights how other industries itself are very dangerous, also presents a profile of workers that are more subject to these, we mentioned disproportionately communities of color working in low wage, high hazard jobs are very much, sort of, again, exposed to these terrible employers. But the criteria is several, and it's sort of a very, clear process that we have that fits that checks off all the boxes in terms of the report itself.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, Dave, some of it has to do with the particular. You're right. Sadly, there's way more cases than just a dozen, and some of it has to do with the particularities of what happened. For example, in Boston, where 2 workers died in a vehicle event at a construction site, so it's part transportation, part construction. But in that case, the city of Boston, based on an earlier incident, passed an ordinance that said you have to disclose your safety violations before you get a construction permit, and the owner and the company just lied about it and wound up putting people in hazardous situations. So that kind of thing strikes us as particularly egregious. Or the Food Foundation Group, and bought by Gold Creek, had an ammonia leak more than a year ago and caused 6 deaths. Then they had 2 more leaks following. So a situation where the problem doesn't seem to have been corrected. Fortunately, there were no fatalities in the second 2, but there could have been. So it's those kind of things. It's more a qualitative analysis of what's happened at those companies. How are the employers behaving? Are they meeting their responsibility to provide a safe workplace? And those are the kind of things we consider as we put the list together.
Thank you, Mark. I see that you have your hand up. If you'd like to unmute yourself.
Yes, thanks very much. I have one question for Jessica and the other national people, another one for Peter Dooley, because I see him on the call. For Jessica and the others, I've been around a long time, covering this stuff a long time. You guys have been around a long time. These companies sound like they're the rule rather than the exception? That's my question. Are they the rule? In other words, should we start with the assumption that corporate America
Well, I can tell you
deliberately?
that we're working to change that dynamic, and that's one of
Okay.
our priorities, which is
Okay.
allowing for the worker narrative to take the platform as the voice. So, which is why
Okay.
we create these spaces and allow
Right.
workers. I mean, what other spaces you see where you have worker leaders on the front line, folks like Mary,
Right.
Nikki, Sandra,
Right.
like providing their testimony, and
Mhm.
not only providing their testimony,
Mhm.
leading a movement of change. The Dirty Dozen itself, again, we were selective. It's a pretty diverse list.
Right.
A lot of these are big corporations. I mean, who hasn't walked into a Starbucks? Who has not,
Right.
maybe received a service from Amazon at this point? And again, it's the reality is if we can change them, it trickles down to the smallest employer in those industries. So that's really our goal here today, is to
Right.
create a wave of workers taking action, workers being respected, workers
Right.
being treated like humans, and also that our government agencies do their due diligence of enforcement and ensuring that the laws that exist are put into practice, and where there isn't a law, that we have a system that facilitates the standards being put in place. Sandra testified to issues around indoor heat. We don't have a heat standard at the moment in this country.
Right.
California has a outdoor heat stress standard. Sandra is testimony that this issue of heat, especially now as a climate justice issue, is impacting both indoor and outdoor heat workers. And I'm just going to make a quick announcement that National COSH will be having a session on heat, which we will announce after this week around heat issues, what the impact is on indoor and outdoor workers. So,
Okay, and you segued right into my question for Peter, which is government agencies. You're in Arizona, Peter. National OSHA is about to come down on the state OSHA hard because of 10 years of resistance. Talk about that.
Well, it's a really serious situation here in Arizona, and it's admirable that federal OSHA is really taking action to sort of put pressure on Arizona State OSHA to really meet the legal requirement that they have, which is that any state plan has to be at least as effective as federal OSHA. And Arizona OSHA has regularly especially in the last decade, has
Right.
really sort of been negligent in even having good faith of trying to meet the criteria that
Right.
that federal OSHA has set. And we know that sort of the OSHA program is only as good as the leadership that it has, and it has to sort of really sort of sort of meet the quality that is set at the federal level. So there's a lot of work to be done. And to your other question, Mark, there are companies that really invest in workplace health and safety. They know that workers are the most valuable resource for a health and safety program. They include workers in those health and safety committees. They work together. But we're highlighting examples of how commonly that is not the case and how tragic the results are. And that something needs to be done more than what's happening currently, and we need to sort of make system improvements throughout so that workers have more power, they have more authority, and they have more say to stand up and speak up without being retaliated against.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, we do have a worker from Refresco on the line. So Lydia, if you are still with us, would you like to let us know how it feels to have Refresco featured in the Dirty Dozen after everything that you and your colleagues have been through?
Where's Lydia?
Lydia, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Okay, ¿me escucha?
Can you hear me? Yes. My name is Lydia Guevara. I've been working at Refresco for 5 years. The reason why all of the employees have united, or at least most of us, to get better benefits for the employees is because Refresco doesn't represent a company that is worried about their employees. During the pandemic, specifically, this company worked 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. But we as employees, they didn't respect our holidays. During the pandemic, they made us work, practically forced us to. At no time did they tell us that there were 35 employees infected. We continued working. And for that reason, I was one of the people that was infected without choosing to be. I also passed the virus to my family. My son lives with me. My mother lives with me as well. So basically the whole family got it. I thank God that nobody lost their life because of this. But at no time did Refresco let us know that all of these cases existed at the company, and we kept working and we kept working. Forced times I remember working 48 hours in a week. If you think about it, money doesn't mean anything as long as our families are safe. We could have, we could get infected so many times. The second reason is that they haven't wanted to change the schedule of 12 hours. We keep working 12 hours at a time and then 10 hours. And there aren't enough employees that want to work at this company for this very reason, because of the schedules. It's a very harsh schedule. And so the supervisors tried to put people in charge of lines where they haven't had enough training. And they do this only to get their products out and to make money. Refresco is not interested in asking why or how they should do their production. For us, it's very difficult. It's very hard. We have very poor benefits, especially in health insurance. That doesn't cover pretty much anything in terms of in the area where we live. I live 5 minutes away from the company. I can say that I'm afraid of getting sick. I'm afraid of something happening to me because the health insurance doesn't cover absolutely anything. My son also got sick last year, and I still have bills. Between the 3 bills I have, it's $3,000, and I haven't been able to pay this yet. So for all of these reasons, we have preferred to ask for support from the union so that we can somehow help ourselves as employees. Refresco has a lot of people who work there, very good employees. And that's one of the reasons why I am supporting the union. Thank you.
Gracias, Lidia. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you so much.
Mark, I see you have your hands up again. Mark, you're on mute, so
Which union?
is that question for Lydia?
Yes.
UE.
UE.
Thank you. Another question I'd like to ask is if Mary would like to speak about the event she has planned on May 2nd.
Thank you, Melissa. We do have a national walkout strike day planned for May 2nd across the United States. Currently, we have 16 states that we know of for sure that are participating. We did get that final number later last night as far as participation, which states and things like that. Although we have heard from employees in all 46 states, and we've even gotten support in some states that don't even have a Dollar General. So we're very excited about that.
Awesome, thank you, Mary. Are there any, Mark, I see your hand is up again. Oh, okay. Any other questions?
Shelly has a question in the chat.
Great, thank you. Okay, Shelly, would you like to unmute yourself and read your question, or would you like us to read it?
Sure. Hi, my name is Shelly Anand. I'm one of the co-founders of Sur Legal, and we represent a lot of the survivors of the Foundation Food Group chemical leaks. Y mi pregunta es para Lida, porque estamos trabajando con muchas personas quien todavía no tienen ningún tipo de estatus.
Sorry, we're working with a lot of people who still don't have any status.
Y ellos tienen miedo a
and they are afraid.
Organizarse.
They're afraid to organize themselves.
Y por ejemplo, hablar en presentación hoy.
And for example, they're afraid to speak in this presentation today.
Y pues yo soy como una abogada, no soy organizadora.
And I'm a lawyer, I'm not an organizer.
Y pues, ¿qué tipo de consejo tiene para
So what kind of advice do you have for them?
Gracias por la pregunta.
Thank you for the question.
No estoy muy segura de haber entendido bien.
I'm not very sure if I understood the question well, but basically most employees right now, we are not afraid to say what we need and fight for our rights. We want to do this. we have faith that in this election that we're about to have, that we're going to win it. We have the support of most employees. I think that 80% needs to see changes, and we're supporting everyone. Most of us are supporting.
Great. Thank you, Lydia.
Thank you.
Okay. Does anyone have anything else that they would like to add before I pass it off to my colleague, Jessica? All right.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And thank you to everyone that joined us here and stayed with us throughout this program. Again, through the chat, we have made access to the report itself. The report itself contains infographics that you could share through your social media platforms. For the press, you're welcome to use it as visuals, as illustrations for any article reports that you may use. So we have the report both available in English and Spanish. And then finally, I'd like to give a special thanks to our presenters for today. Again, these courageous worker leaders, to Jennifer Bates, Mary Gundel, Nikki Taylor, and Sandra Mejia. Thank you so much for joining, as well as Lydia Guevara from Refresco. A big thank you to our National COSH team who has made this report possible, and to our interpreters who supported our program today. For more information, check out our website. At the very least, follow us through our social media platforms. We have live streamed this event through Twitter. We're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Again, our website contains all the information in both English and Spanish. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.